You are good to go.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the City Council Oversight Committee meeting. It is Thursday, October 8th. We have 2 items on the agenda today. The first item is continued discussion regarding programming for the Community Needs Reserve Fund. And really what I was aiming for with this agenda item is, now that we've had a little over a week to kind of digest the recommendations that the task force came up with, I wanted to kind of go through them a little bit more and just kind of get everyone's thoughts on them, because we've had a couple meetings previously where Norman Citizens for Racial Justice have been at the table to kind of talk to us about what their hopes are for this kind of program. And then we get this task force recommendation, which, as far as I am aware, did not include any additional public input aside from the task force committee members. I know that was something that the task force had talked about doing, sending out a survey to get some feedback. From what I understand, they did not do that. And so what I wanted to do was just kind of talk through as many of these recommendations as we can get through, while leaving time for our second agenda item, and just kind of piece them out a little bit more, what our thoughts are on them, whether or not we think this actually puts us on a path towards a program or set of programs that reflects the needs that the community relayed to us back in June. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Ellen, I was able to finally get that presentation sent to myself. So I'm going to...
Kate, I sent it to you. Did you get it?
I did get it, and mine finally came through. It tried to kill my iPad sending it. It just took forever and locked everything up, and I wasn't sure if it was actually going to come through, but it did. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. I do think that means that I won't be able to see you guys. So if you want me to stop, or you have a question or want to make a comment about it, unless it gets too unwieldy, I would say just unmute yourself and chime in, and just try not to talk over each other, which I know I'm really bad at doing too. So let's see if I can pull this up. Okay, can everyone see this?
I can.
Okay, great. So the first recommendation from the task force was to create create a physical hub for social service agency collaboration. And I really liked this idea. I wasn't entirely sure kind of how it would look in practice versus in idea, but I do like the opportunity, either in a physical location or at minimum in a section of our website, to provide more detail about what our agencies already do and how they do it. I think this kind of goes into item number 3 as well: publicize existing service options for community members. And I really hope that kind of those two could be wrapped into one. I'm going to see if I bring this back up. Okay, I can see you guys now. Can you still see the screen? Okay, great. I'm not planning on kind of moving through those. I'm not going to scroll at all. I just wanted to kind of leave those up there so that everyone could know kind of what we're talking about. So my kind of initial vision is that we could do it on a section of our website and just provide some additional detail about what our agencies already do and how they do it. I think that would also provide these agencies another platform to be able to share information and talk about their programming, any special events that they have, or fundraising opportunities for their services. But in terms of a physical location, my biggest thought on that was, man, I wish that the homeless facility bond had passed, because to me, that would have been the perfect spot for it. We already talked about kind of having our continuum of care partners involved in a physical location for a homeless facility. So my thought was that these two would kind of go hand in hand. But this is one that I think could at least be tackled in part pretty easily with just some data gathering from these agencies and some work from our IT staff to put them on our website in a way that is accessible to people. Did anyone else have any thoughts about this one? Particularly like it, particularly not like it, or have any thoughts of how this could be different? Councilmember Holman.
Yeah, this was one of my top four that I listed, at least as a priority, would be having some sort of hub for all this information. It doesn't necessarily have to be a building, as you mentioned. It could be part of our website, but definitely it would be ideal, I think, to have a physical location that people could say, well, this is where you go to find all the information you will need about all the services that are offered in Norman currently can be found in this one spot. Here's the address.
Right.
That would be ideal for sure if we can figure that one out sometime.
Yeah, I was thinking the thing that since the homeless facility bond didn't pass, I was thinking that this almost might lead to a greater opportunity for a larger vision for this in particular. We've done a lot of investment recently in public safety and in youth sports. That seems to be our two biggest initiatives. And what I would love to see maybe for a third is something a little broader, almost more like the Norman Community Center. And it has different aspects in different part of the building. So, it would have a homeless shelter, call it a overnight shelter, or if we want it to include a day shelter, could be one side of the building with its own entrance, could host our continuum of care partners. And then in the other 2/3 or 3/4 of the building could be a community center where these social agencies have a presence, but where we could also provide almost like the rec centers, but something that isn't run by Norman Public Schools, but is run by the city of Norman. Could have overlap for all age ranges. It was the county project that really got me thinking about this, that, they're really trying to provide a centralized location for a lot of county services. And I was just struck by the fact that really hadn't been a part of the conversation, at least since I started plugging into things that have been happening at the city level. Stephen, you might have more insight on that, but at least since 2014 or 2015, I really haven't heard much talk about a Norman Community Center where we could bring all of these different ideas together in one building.
So the idea of bringing everything together into one thing has been part of a bigger discussion over the years. Mm-hmm. One vision, one voice is what it has been called. But that was what was used to get the new food and shelter for Friends facility built. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the brand that was put behind it. But the idea that April Heipel, she was one of many, but being the director of food and shelter, the idea behind it was, we have a lot of services in Norman, but we don't all know, not everyone knows what they all are. And there is some overlap. And can we get in a more organized, can we get more organized so there's not overlap and we can reach more people with our resources? And the new food and shelter, not necessarily being the central hub for all that as far as its design, but that getting that facility was a step towards this overall goal of bringing all the resources together. So it's been talked about, but not necessarily in my recollection about building a community center. Moore has a community center off the highway there. It's seemingly more like a rec center, but that they've got going on, but it is called the Moore Community Center. And so I've kind of always wondered why Norman didn't have, I've always known we've had the rec centers at Irving, Whittier, and 12th Street, but I always wondered why we didn't have a community center, because I would see that on, TV and movies and stuff like that. Towns seem to always have a community center, and we didn't have anything that was called that. So I don't know that there probably has been a discussion about that at some point, but not any time recently that I can recall that we've talked about a building that would, function that way.
Yeah, and it seems like we do a lot of these things just very disparately. We have some meeting room space at our libraries, as an example. Food and shelter, it looks like, has taken kind of the low income or the homeless resource side of it and kind of done their own thing in their own area. And of course, we have the senior center, which does senior programming, which is almost like just an age bracketed community center, aimed at a certain age range, but seems to include that same vision just for a certain segment of the population. And then of course we have the rec centers, which are operated by Norman Public Schools, but also seem to be focused more along the lines of sports, although I know that they do some non-sports programming at the rec centers. But it just seemed to me that I could see a value in kind of bringing all of these together into one proposal, maybe senior center aside, since there is some age specific programming that I think a senior center is better off doing on their own. But maybe this is a two birds, one stone kind of issue, or if we can look at this community center, maybe we, in the event that, because I'm not willing to let go of this idea yet, but in the event that we're not able to find the additional $5 million for the senior center, are any of the aspects of the senior center that we're not going to be able to build able to be included in a different proposal for a broader reaching audience? Don't get scared, seniors. I'm not saying that this is the way I want to go. I'm just trying to think about these things a little more comprehensively. And maybe some of the aspects of the senior center that we can't build could be put into a community center. Just a thought. But I do really like this first recommendation from the task force. I think it generates a lot of interesting ideas and a lot of interesting discussion. And I see that Councilmember Hall unmuted, so I'm gonna preemptively call on her to speak.
Here I come. Yeah, I really like this idea. I really like the comments that you both have made so far. I think, we've definitely seen the value of collaborating with the continuum of care model that we use for homelessness. And so, we've seen the success of that. And we do seem to be hearing over and over and over again that we do have a variety of services available, but not coordinated in some way. So I, at the very minimum, think that we can, see what we can do in the cyber world while we're working on the rest of this. But I do agree that it does create some opportunity for a more comprehensive look, because I think we have a lot of social service agencies in town that are working really, really hard to meet the needs of their constituent group. But I think anytime that we can find ways to partner and collaborate, it just results in more availability to the people who really can use these services. So I too am really intrigued by this idea. And really, number 2 fits right into that too, of highlighting and facilitating greater interagency collaboration. It's all part of one big package, I think.
Yeah, so those three kind of all complement each other and can all support each other. And I think tackling any one of those without tackling the others would be a disservice and a doubling of efforts or tripling of efforts.
We really do have an opportunity before us to look at it more globally and build a structure that maybe we can't get to right away, but if we can build the structure and start plugging in the puzzle pieces as we go, I think that would be off to a really good start. And I think, again, we've already spent some time talking about publicizing existing service options, and I do think we still need to continue to explore, different and creative ways to reach populations that we're normally not reaching right now.
Right.
Even without the collaboration. I think we need to really kind of keep that front and center to continue exploring ways to reach out to communities that really may not be well served right now.
Right. And that actually is a really good segue into the 4th recommendation, augment police services with a range of social service providers. That was, let's see, how do I say this in an appropriate way? This was the item that generated the most feedback to me the quickest. It was the one that some members of the community seemed to take exception to pretty quickly. I don't know exactly what the task force meant when they said augment police services. I don't know if it was simply a poor choice of words or if they really did mean supplement the police department in some way. But that's the one I think that concerns me a little bit, because I don't, and for a number of reasons, and they kind of conflict with each other. The first is that I think there is a not small percentage of this community that wants to see less police involvement in some of the calls that they typically go on. But I also think that some of the agencies that participated in this task force and were probably in people's minds when they developed this recommendation are agencies that are problematic for some of the marginalized communities in our city. Don't necessarily have the greatest track record when it comes to LGBTQ support, as an example. And so this is one that I'm going to have to parse out a little bit more, because it was a little surprising when we were talking about the mobile crisis unit, to find that it's really mostly a one-way relationship. That when the mobile crisis unit needs police backup, they call. But when police arrive on the scene of a call that is truly a mental health call and maybe doesn't even really need police presence, they don't call the mobile crisis unit. And so that was pretty surprising to me. And it's something that I think needs to be teased out before I feel comfortable kind of embarking on some kind of MOU or contractual agreement with our social service agencies to engage more in police calls. And so I guess this kind of leads me to a more broader question of, what are we really trying to do? Especially with this $630,000. Are we trying to reduce the number of calls that our police officers respond to? Are we trying to better equip them for the existing number of calls that they go on? Because I feel like that's going to better determine the direction that we take on particularly item number 4 of augment police services with social service agencies, but also number 9, expand the hours of current mobile crisis service units. I think we need to decide what the perspective is and what the track is that we're trying to take, because it was pretty fast that I started getting, I mean, we weren't even done with that item on the list when we were talking about it last Tuesday before I felt my phone start to vibrate with messages from people, and I knew exactly what they were going to be telling me. So I wanted to get some thoughts from you guys about that item in particular, but also, where did you want to go with this? What is the aim? What is the objective for what we're going to be accomplishing here? And I don't think it's a bad thing that we put this money aside and then are trying to decide what to do with it, because we've gotten dinged quite a bit in the last few years about telling people what we wanted to do and then not being able to fund it properly. So I almost think it's a better track to take to say, this is all the money we have. What can we do with it? But I think that perspective is really important. And I know that you three have been involved in all of the conversations that we've had about this in Oversight Committee and just generally among council. So for this item in particular, but also generally, what are your thoughts about the objective that we're actually trying to achieve here? And Councilmember Holman, I saw you unmute and then you muted again. So if you're, okay.
Yeah. When I see augment police services with a range of social service providers, I definitely, what comes to my mind anyway is, my intent would be, are there other services that can respond to certain calls that the police are currently responding to where maybe they're not needed? So I can definitely see why some folks would read that a different way, or maybe that whether it's advocating that services stay with the police department, but it's another branch of it. I could definitely see that. But I do kind of read it as, we have other services, could those maybe supplement, might have been the better word, I'm not sure, but that my goal would be to lighten the call load on our existing police department, and better equip the officers we have at the same time. So not only better equipped, better trained for situations, but also not having to respond to as many. And whether it's 1,000 calls or 5,000 or maybe even significantly more than that, potentially, But that would be the ideal situation, is lessen the opportunity for interaction with police, carry a lethal weapon. My hope is to reduce the chances of a bad situation happening, and goes into, I think, part of number 5 too. But anyway, talk about that one next. But that's kind of what I would think about it is, are there other ways? I mean, looking at the call log and welfare check or some sort of thing where we've determined that over a number, thousands of calls in years, that maybe a police officer is not necessary to be the first one to respond to that situation. Mm-hmm. And I would absolutely agree that if they are going to be the one that responds, there should be a communication going on that, yes, we think maybe we could use backup from this service provider to come out here. They may be better equipped to deal with the situation than we are at the moment, and we'll be on standby in case we are needed. Mm-hmm. So that would be my intent with number 4, is definitely to find ways to lighten the load and provide our police officers that we do have with better tools and training.
Yeah, that was my original thought too. And after this task force recommendation came out, I kind of started second guessing myself. I was like, I felt like we made that pretty clear, both actually in the 2 June meetings and then also in the Oversight Committee meetings. But I didn't know what information the task force had been given on those topics. So, Councilmember Patron, I see you unmuted. Did you want to weigh in? No, maybe not. Maybe her mouth hit it.
If you can give me just a minute, I'm going to chime in after. I'll go last, if that's okay.
Okay, no problem.
Okay.
Councilmember Hall.
I'll hop in there because one of my frustrations has been not actually getting to see the documents that were generated from the task force. And we really didn't see any of that until after our meeting last week. And I've not had a chance to get through all of those as of yet. So I really want to dig in a little deeper to what is the background of number 4 and what was the intent, because I don't think we really know. And so for example, I just pulled up the summary from one of the early meetings, and there was an alternative policing models discussion. And I believe I recall the mayor mentioning last week that not only did they learn about the CAHOOTS model that we had discussed at length in one of our Oversight Committee meetings, but other models that were similar in nature, but maybe the details of how they operated were a little bit different. So
yeah, the Memphis model was the one that they see that seemed to appeal to them the most.
Yeah, and so I think there's more information to be had, and like I said, I just have not had the time to get through all of that because there are quite a few things that were shared with us after that meeting. So I don't disagree with anything that you've said so far, because I think we're looking for that balance of being able to have other social service providers respond when appropriate. And I was really interested in learning more about the mobile crisis service units, because I really wasn't very familiar with that. And, the current restriction that they have on hours of operation really caught my attention. And, that might be something that we want to investigate a little bit more too, about better funding, because I believe for children, it's a 24/7, but not for adults. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that was a big one on my list. Because one of the things that I have on my list of things to do, and just so everyone knows, I just wanted this to kind of be a starter conversation and give us an opportunity to talk about it a little bit more after we got the additional information. But I'd love to know more about the mobile crisis unit, particularly in terms of the demographics of their calls. I'd really love to know who knows about this service and who tends to use it, and what educational outreach opportunities they've done to make sure that people in lower income neighborhoods know about these services, as an example. Because when we were in May and June and kind of getting towards these budget discussions, of course, we all started getting contacted more regularly by people who had a lot to say about their police interactions. And around that time, I also was being sent videos from someone who is very concerned about a neighbor of hers whose granddaughter seemed to be having a pretty significant mental health crisis, and had a pretty concerning interaction, she thought, with the police. And those are the kinds of situations that come to my mind of, would this grandmother have called the police if she knew that she had a mobile crisis unit that was more thoroughly trained in mental health, to be able to assist her with her daughter or transport her daughter, maybe in a non-police vehicle setting? Maybe if it had been mental health professionals with early childhood mental health training, maybe this child wouldn't have ended up in handcuffs in the back of the police car, which might have helped the experience. So that's what really got me thinking about the demographics of who this unit tends to serve and what areas of town the majority of their calls come from, that kind of thing. I'd really love to know more about who knows about them and how can we better signal boost what they do. And then also parse out this partnership with NPD, because I think the mobile crisis unit could be a really great, almost like a pilot program with the money that we have, to see if we can do more with what we already have here. But I need to know more about who they serve and how the information gets out there. Because I feel like these are the kinds of programs that, without that really intentional outreach to marginalized communities, tends to be used by, middle and upper middle class white families who, think that it'll be easier to call the mobile crisis unit at 2 a.m. for their, uncontrollable child than maybe someone in a lower income neighborhood. Not to speak ill of the mobile crisis unit at all. I don't think that this is that anything would be intentional, but I'd love to see more about the demographics of who they serve and what areas of town they come from, so we can see if this is the right kind of partner. Because I think they already have a really great program in place that has the potential to serve a significant part of the purpose we're hoping to accomplish when we think about programs like the Cahoots program. It seems like they already do a lot of that in their own way. So I really would love to look more into them. But I did just kind of want to start this conversation today. Councilmember Patron.
Okay, thank you. So I think I echo a lot of the same comments that Councilmember Hall and Councilmember Behrman have also spoken to. It was a lot of information, but it was all the other night, but it was also very surface, since we weren't, really a part of the process. So trying to understand what all of those meetings have entailed was kind of a crash course. I feel like there's probably experts in this area that looks at other communities and can really say this is a model that that is working well, and the statistics bear that out. What I found interesting about and this wasn't part of that conversation at all, but about the Cahoots model, was that there was a medic that goes on a mental health crisis call. And so it wasn't police, it was instead the 911 dispatch person for that private crisis mobile team, as I guess is what we kind of have here. Instead of the cop, it's a medic and a social worker. So I don't know. I want to make sure that we are being responsive to what modern public safety models say is going to give us statistically the best outcomes, while at the same time relieve burden from the police department of having to go on calls that as we heard the other night from our department, are rather lengthy in nature. So that it takes a lot longer for our police department to call on these specific calls. And I don't know that it takes the same amount of time for the medic unit to go. I mean, perhaps if that's their area of expertise, they're able to get to the brass tacks of the situation quicker. I have no idea. But regardless, it sounded to me like they were kind of suggesting that it was a bit of a just extremely time consuming for an individual call. So I feel like we haven't gotten there yet, but I do want to investigate further on this crisis teams that we are calling on the 3 counties in the area, and see what that would look like if we were to take it 24 hours on the adults for Norman. Obviously, we can't fund all of the 3 counties that they call on, but it does sound like it's a step in the direction of what we're seeing as best practices coming out across the U.S. So, Councilmember Bierman, am I correct? Is my memory serving me well to think that you have spoken with somebody from the community that has this cahoots plan in place already? And how does that look compared to what we have? And could we potentially schedule a oversight Zoom meeting to hear from this person?
I would love to. I spoke with one of the city council members in Eugene, Oregon, about the Cahoots program, and they're larger than Norman, but by necessity, therefore, their program is larger than Norman, and so it wouldn't be all that difficult to scale kind of their style of program down to fit our community, and we already have resources here that they don't. They don't have a school of social work at a major university in their community. They don't have a public trust hospital, but they did have the Whitebird Clinic, which functions very similarly to the mobile crisis unit. And that's how they started it. It was by having a resource already in their community that they built a larger program around. And I know that a lot of, I guess I wouldn't say opponents of the Cahoots program, but those who are very cautious about it speak to the response times, because they do have longer response times than the Eugene Police Department or than the Norman Police Department. But a critical aspect to that is that if the call is a non-emergency call, not someone standing on a bridge threatening to jump, so to speak, it's not. The timeliness isn't quite so much of an issue. If there's someone just running down the street, as long as someone knows what direction they're going and they're not harming anyone, they can take a little bit longer. And on the calls where there is an emergent threat, the police respond first and secure the area. They don't interact with the person, but this council member used the bridge example, that if someone's on a bridge threatening to jump, the police are called, dispatch calls the Cahoots team. And in the meantime, police officers come and secure the area to make sure that no matter what happens, everyone stays safe. So they do have incredible response times with their police department, as we do with ours. And the Cahoots program behind it, yes, has a slightly slower response time, but they have incredible outcomes. And that's, in my opinion, the most important thing. And in that council member's mind is the most important thing. And they have drastically reduced the rate of officer injury on calls like this. And so I think that having a Zoom call, excuse me, with some representatives of Cahoots and the city of Eugene would not be a terrible idea. Their program costs close to $2 million for a population of almost 250,000. So if you cut that in about half, that's not an unachievable number for a city of Norman's size, especially considering the number of calls that we would pull off the Norman Police Department's plate. And they also have what I would consider to be soft success in the community. The relationships between their marginalized community and the police department have gotten a lot better. The relationship with these marginalized communities and the city generally has gotten a lot better. And to be honest, that is in contrast to the Memphis model. The Memphis CIT model is extremely popular among law enforcement. it is also a program hosted within the local police departments. But one of the concerning things that I found about the Memphis model is that the relationship between the marginalized and minority communities in Memphis and the police department has not improved, nor has the relationship of these marginalized communities with the city more generally, excuse me, has not improved. And so to me, those soft outcomes are also incredibly important. Reducing officer injury and I don't know if you want to call it suspect or victim injury is important. And the Memphis model does accomplish that. But those soft outcomes are also incredibly important. And that program hasn't moved the needle as much in Memphis as I think everyone was hoping that it would. So, I think a deeper dive into some of this is going to be really, really helpful. But I wanted to have a public discussion about this before we went to our retreat, because I feel like we're probably going to be fleshing some of this out a little bit more at the retreat. So I think we do have a working opportunity with the mobile crisis unit, but I think we have a lot more due diligence to do in that before we can figure out if this is the only direction we want to go or if there are multiple directions.
And I just want to throw out there, just as a matter of information,
Yes.
we were invited to attend a Cleveland County Mental Health Task Force meeting was mentioned at the meeting last week. And
were you able to attend that?
well, it's tomorrow. And
Oh, tomorrow. I thought it was last Friday. Excellent.
Nope.
Great.
No.
Okay.
So I am planning on Zooming in. And interestingly enough, one of the agenda items for new business is expectations to further develop mobile crisis response teams staffed by mental health professionals.
Wonderful.
So I will
That's great.
gather information and report back.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I might be able to attend tomorrow, but there's no guarantee. So if you know that you're going to be able to, that would be a great way for us to not duplicate efforts.
I'm in.
Fantastic. Any more thoughts or comments on item number 4 before we continue? I don't saw someone unmute and then I realized it was Planning Director Jane Hudson. I'm pretty sure she doesn't want to weigh in on this one. So I will move on to the next item, which is identify policing approaches for officers in soft uniforms. And I really like this one. This was actually something that was first brought up to me as a part of the SRO program of possibly softening the SRO uniforms, particularly in elementary and middle school. And so I would love to talk about opportunities to maybe do this elsewhere in our police force. I know that we have a small bike unit that I think would be an appropriate way to kind of kick that off. But this honestly made me think more about, more generally, the community-oriented policing model and how I don't really feel like we've quite gotten there yet. We don't have many officers that just walk beats. And I feel like that's something that was something that we thought about with PSST and then never fully implemented. And so in addition to soft uniforms, I would like for us to consider how we can encourage more of that kind of community-oriented policing. And I'm going to turn it over now to Councilmember Holman because he's got a lot more background on this than I do.
Thank you. The soft uniform issue is one that I've been interested in for a number of years, actually, just in regard to general police profession. There's actually quite a bit of study on the psychological impacts of police uniforms over a number of years, over the last 50 years. And a lot of police departments throughout the years have experimented with several different types of uniforms and colors and all sorts of stuff. And there's been varying results to it. But one of the things that I often would talk up to former Chief Humphrey about, was like, just in regard to the police force as a whole, was going back to a more softer traditional uniform, trying to get away from the more tactical military looking uniform, and getting back to the examples I would give the chief were like in Oklahoma City and Dallas. You see it in bigger cities generally, but for special events, you'll see police officers wearing the traditional police hat, not a baseball cap that looks like a security guard at a mall or something, but a traditional police hat. You know, it looks very professional, and you'll even see them wearing like the clip-on tie and the nice uniform that fits and things like that. And it really looks nice. It looks professional. It looks like that's somebody I can go and get information from, or I can get help from. I don't think people feel that way when they see an officer decked out in full tactical gear and military boots and you know, all this stuff on them. I understand that there are times where officers need that type of equipment, perhaps. I don't know that they need it while standing on the corner at OU football game day. And I would agree too that in schools, I'm thankful that our SROs that are in the schools right now do wear a very, they don't wear anything that looks, at least the ones I've seen at Norman High and Norman North, wear, you know, just a regular patrol uniform. They don't wear the tactical vests and have all the stuff on them. But I would definitely like to see, as you mentioned, in the elementary schools specifically, when we do have those, if that program is continued in the future, that, you know, we look at things like polo shirt and you know, dress pants, and, you know, don't need to be flashing our gun everywhere, and the clanking of handcuffs and keys. And that's one of the things that the Crisis Cops show on HBO talked about from San Antonio, was how their program is part of the police department. It's a division of the police department, or a unit, I guess, of 12 officers, I think. But they wear polo shirts and jeans and sneakers, and they like their polo shirt is untucked, so they keep their gun covered up and kind of to the side a little bit, so it's not just right there. They have cuffs, I think, but they have them in a way where they don't clink back and forth, and they don't have keys that are making all sorts of noise. So they're trying not to have any kind of things that might trigger someone or set them off. And they've talked about how just the mere appearance of a police uniform, a patrol officer showing up, and the patrol officer may have the perfect training. They may be the nicest, calm person in the world. But the mere fact that they're wearing a police uniform and the badge and the gun, and the person sees that and they start to freak out over it. And so that's one of the things they talked about in regard to soft uniforms, and how it's not always the most tactically advantageable approach, but it can help resolve other situations maybe more effectively than the tactical uniforms can. So that's what I've kind of been pushing for a number of years, is like special events like Art Walk. If we're going to have Norman officers at Art Walk or walking around Main Street, maybe instead of a baseball cap, they put on the traditional, you know, hat that looks real nice, and they, you know, that would make a big difference, I think, instead of walking around in the car, driving around in the car, that type of thing, and not getting out and talking to the people and things like that. So,
and I completely agree with that. Oh, go ahead, Allison.
Can I ask a question? Did you all, I don't remember hearing whether or not body cams are on the soft uniforms. And one thing that did register with me and kind of been chewing on is they said that they don't have any less lethal means of protecting themselves. I mean, it's a gun or nothing else. So I was hoping you all could kind of speak to some of those two questions.
For SROs specifically?
No, for soft uniforms.
Oh, for soft uniforms. Okay. I don't necessarily have any specific details on that. Do you, Councilmember Holman?
I recall them saying that when some of the examples that our department was given last week was that they weren't carrying the full duty belt. They were only carrying a gun and maybe handcuffs. And so that did present
Oh,
some
I see.
concern
Okay.
for folks that their only option was then going to be a gun. So a little bit of a situation there, because at the same time, I can see why we don't want to have them carrying a whole full utility belt full of stuff. And so getting them to not bring a gun, I think for a lot of folks, that would be ideal, is to have an armed response to, when possible, identifying calls that we can respond to without an armed response. But if it is a unit of the police department, I'm pretty sure they're going to carry a gun somewhere. And so I think once we start adding more stuff to that, to their belt of stuff, that is an issue. But I agree, I don't want their only tool to be that gun as well. So that is definitely something we need to discuss further, I think, in my opinion.
And what about the body cams? Because if memory serves me correctly, I really like our soft uniforms, but the last time I saw them working in the peaceful protests that were in Norman, I didn't see any body cams. They were in soft uniforms.
I think it might, if I understand it, it's because of the way the body cams attach to uniforms. They require the button down shirt to clip into, and that might be, so it might just be a function of changing the type or style of the soft uniform. The polo shirts would work, but I don't know if that's all they have or if they need them to be lower. That probably speaks to Councilmember Holman's point of, I'm sure that it's not just the little piece that clips onto the chest. I believe it has a battery pack or something that's, almost more like a TV station microphone. You've got the battery pack that you have to stick in your back pocket, and then it gets fed up to wherever it's clipping on. But I mean, since we're just starting this discussion, I'm sure there are lots of different styles of soft uniforms out there, different types of shirts, different, I don't necessarily want to change the types of body cams that we use because that's a much more expensive piece of equipment, but soft uniforms, can come in a variety of styles. And so I certainly would like our officers in soft uniforms to be wearing body cams. I think that's really important. So however we can do that, I think is appropriate. And, maybe the same for, maybe a taser isn't the right way to go, but, some other less than lethal option. I mean, a taser isn't all that much bigger than a sidearm. So, I could see one on each side, but, I think these are logistical things that if this is the direction we want to go with this for some aspects of the police force in some circumstances or in some locations, I think there's enough opportunity. I almost said fashions out there, but not really a fashion issue, but enough different styles of soft uniforms that we could probably find one that's in use somewhere that works for what we're looking for. But I think those are all really important questions to ask as we kind of get started in that process. Councilmember Hall, did you have anything to add on soft uniforms? Okay. All right, so we will move on to number 6, expand services using multilingual resources. I feel like this one's a given. I don't know too many of us who would oppose ensuring that we have additional multilingual opportunities. But I think that we should not ignore the fact that we also need to make this a priority within our police force itself, especially when it comes to at least conversational Spanish, to be able to convey what needs to be conveyed, even if you do it in a fairly broken and choppy way. I think that that's really important. We sometimes lose sight of that in the information that we put out there. I honestly feel like we have gotten to the point as a city where every single press release that goes out also needs a Spanish copy, because we have people in this community who are they just can't understand the information we put out there. But especially with our police force, I think it's important that we ensure, and I don't deign to know how many officers we have on the force who have at least a minimal conversational Spanish, at least in terms of police jargon in Spanish, and making sure that if they are interacting with someone who doesn't speak very good English, that they can convey what needs to be conveyed. I don't know how many officers we have with that skill, But I think that that's something that we need to, if we can't hire people with that skill, then we need to do some regular training officers who are willing to do it, to respond to calls, or have a translator that we can call to be able to come and assist, because it's not a small percentage of our population that we need to be able to interact with, that I don't know for sure right now that we can.
You know, that brings up an interesting point, because I don't recall that being a question that we've actually asked, and I'm sure we could find out. It would be,
I'm sure we
I'd
could.
be really interested to know how many different languages may be spoken by our police department and our fire department too.
Right.
I'd be interested in knowing what resources we have there, because we may have more than we think.
Right. I completely agree. Councilmember Holman.
Yeah, I would be interested to know how many officers we have as well that are multilingual. I think ideally it would be nice to have at least one on each shift that could respond if needed. But I understand it may be hard to hire that at all times. But since we do have the OUPD and the county sheriff's department in town also, maybe there already is. But you know, given the three departments at any given time, maybe between all three of them, there is somebody on at all times that has the ability to speak multiple languages, perhaps. But with OU, you know, being a pretty large hub of international students in normal circumstances, I've always thought it would be appropriate for Norman to do more than we have historically when it comes to providing services, at least the ability for people with different languages to understand the information that the city is providing. But especially if you're involved in interaction with the police, a language barrier could be deadly. So, and we've seen that not in Norman necessarily, but other places for sure. So, be what I think about that.
I mean, I'm even thinking basic. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Councilmember Hall.
I was going to say that just sort of made me think about that the fact that there is a pretty healthy contingent, I believe, of volunteers that contribute time to the Norman Police Department in a variety of functions, and maybe this would be another opportunity, another volunteer opportunity to identify people that could, you know, that speak a certain language and could be available if called upon. That might be another opportunity to use too.
I agree. I'm thinking on the very, very basic level, ensuring that officers have at least, even if it's just a like laminated card of phonetically spelled words. I mean, that's how I stumbled through the Mourners Kaddish at Ruth Bader Ginsburg's memorial service that we held, as I literally just found a translation that I could read out. Even so, in just basic terms, do you understand English? Do you need a translator? And then I know that there are phone services that can be, you know, that we could contract with, where you call the 800 number and say, I need a Spanish translator. And you can put the phone on speakerphone and they will provide translating services for you. So if we're not able to find enough people for us to feel comfortable with on the force currently who can provide these services, contracting with a service that can be utilized by any police officer, as long as they have the ability to read a few words in kind of English phoneticized Spanish to be able to convey that they can offer this to someone, can be a bridge builder and can help them therefore better understand what is actually happening in this police interaction. And I think that there are other small things we can do, like have a Spanish translated ticket book in each cruiser. The majority of these officers can fill out these tickets without even looking at them. They know what goes in each line. And so if you can have a Spanish language one that you can utilize if someone is more comfortable in Spanish, then you can fill that out for them in Spanish so they know what is happening and how their court date is scheduled and where they go to pay their fines, as an example. And so, I think this is something that we're going to also have to look at more broadly, because as an example, you call the Action Center and you only get English. It's your only option. If you get a voice, if you have to leave a message with the Action Center, it's only in English. You're not given any other options. And so, I think that there's a lot that we can do on this broadly, but even when it comes to the police department, I think that there are very low cost ways that we can ensure that the Spanish speaking population in particular in this city has just as equal access and understanding of the things that are happening to them in these police interactions.
One thing I would say on that note is I imagine that, I would be shocked if our dispatchers already, if we don't have somebody that's on every shift that can speak Spanish. So my hope would be that we're already keeping dispatch, if the responding officer isn't able to communicate effectively with, a Spanish speaking resident, that you can keep dispatch on the phone.
That's a great idea.
To be able to do that. And then I just lost my train of thought. I love that. But I am surprised on the action line that we don't have a option for Spanish speaking residents. So we probably do. That's a different conversation entirely, but it is one that needs to be addressed for sure. Oh, I remember what it was. If we're talking about adding social workers or, working with the fire department to have these teams have a medic that is answering on some of these, that's another area where that could be the translating liaison. If at some point PD was responding officer was needing to communicate for whatever reason, if the crisis unit wasn't enough.
Right.
But that's definitely a skill that we would want to be looking for to add to those crisis unit teams.
I agree. I think that's a great point. And I really like the thought about dispatchers. I can't imagine that we don't have dispatchers with at least some conversational Spanish. And that would be a really good first way to kind of see if we can get, an SOP more formalized for how to handle coming into contact with someone who doesn't speak good enough English to know what is actually happening. Any additional thoughts on item 6 before we continue? I wasn't sure, Councilmember Holman, if your hand was up for this one or if it had just stayed up from before.
It just
All
stayed
right.
up.
Okay. So, and then number 7, identify resources to reinstitute the Juvenile Intervention Center. This is one that I have heard a lot about, basically just in complaint form, that we don't have it anymore. There seemed to be a lot of interest among council in maybe reviving that. I was shocked to understand that the city only withdrew its funding a couple years ago fully. In fact, like while I was on council, which I had no idea about. So this is something I'd love to talk about. I know that cost is an issue when we had it. But I really hope that we can find a way to talk about how to handle children in need without just talking about the cost per head. Because I don't necessarily think driving them all the way up to Oklahoma City and putting them in a completely different community is necessarily the right way to go. But Councilmember Holman, I'm sure that you have a lot more familiarity with the Juvenile Intervention Center than I do. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I was interested in this one as well. It's definitely stood out to me. Driving to North OKC didn't seem very efficient cost-wise. I mean, that's definitely more than an hour of a police officer's time. That's wear and tear on police vehicles, things like that. So return in, with Norman and Moore combined, I mean, we're looking at over 200,000 people. Just Moore and Norman, cities of Moore and Norman alone is over 200,000 people. So, or close to it anyway. So it would seem like having a service that services the South Metro area would be appropriate, whether it's in Norman or Moore or South OKC, I don't know, but having that available without having to go to the north side of the city would seemingly more efficient and potentially have cost savings. But I agree too about the process of taking a child out of a situation and taking them to North OKC and dropping them off. I was kind of wondering what happens after that. Does their parents have to go up to the city to get them at some point, or what happens there? Because I'm sure they wouldn't know anybody at all. There wouldn't be even a person they might even recognize, like, oh, I've seen them around town before. Or, I've seen them at my school before. Or something, which would be likely, I would say, in Norman. A child might recognize somebody, at least.
Yeah.
So I would like to see more information about the pros and cons of the specific service. Like, what were the negative things, or what were the complaints about it, how it was operated, or the condition of the facility that we had before. Because I know it was just a house off Robinson Street over there for a long time. I never have been inside that thing, so I don't know what it was like inside or how it was operated, if there were lots of complaints about, people being treated wrongly or something. But I think it did have a lot, talked about last week with state and county funding cuts to it is, kind of why the city took on the responsibility back in 2013, 14. But it definitely was a lot to take on for just the city alone, I would say. And if the numbers really did dwindle down to what they were saying, and it made more sense to switch over to what they're doing now, I could see that. But I would definitely like to reevaluate what we're doing now and see if we can figure out a way to return that service to Norman Moore area, if we can determine that it was a valuable thing that we needed to have, and it was, for the majority, was a very positive service that we had. So I definitely want to talk about that one. That was one of the 5 that I had highlighted.
Yeah, that was a big one for me, because a lot of people that I know and respect who have been involved in city issues alongside me for a long time have talked about this for a long time. Members of the Human Rights Commission and the Inclusivity Subcommittee, this has been a big topic for them over the last few years. And so I share a lot of Councilmember Holman's same concerns. The fact that the people who have advocated for reinstating the JIC have not mentioned too much in the way of concerns with how it was run, or at least not nearly as many concerns as they have with it not existing at all. Gives me a lot of optimism. But I really think not just Moore and Norman and South OKC, but also Newcastle and Blanchard and Noble and Washington and Lexington and Purcell. I mean, where do families in those communities turn to when they need assistance with their children? I don't know that many of them have much in the way of options. And so I do think that this could even be more useful and broader than even just Moore and Norman. I think starting with Cleveland County would be a great idea. I know that they've been doing a lot with, and working on their sobriety center and things like that. So my hope is that this is a trend that our new sheriff will continue to go down. Sheriff Gibson was pretty instrumental in getting a lot of this stuff done, and hopefully with his presence in Moore, that will bode well for their continued participation in this if we want to revive it. And hopefully we and Chief Gibson now can help encourage whoever our new sheriff is in Cleveland County to come on board with us as well. But yeah, this is one that was really on the top of my list to start investigating, because I really had a hard time understanding what the $900 a head versus all of the variables that go into dropping a child off in a completely different community that it's multiple hours of an officer's time. North Oklahoma City, depending on the time of day that you're going up there, it will take you an hour just to get there. And then however much time you're spending to, process and make this child an inpatient there, and then the drive all the way back. And I think it is very likely that someone in a completely different community feels even more lost and harder to help than someone in their own community. And I think it provides a layer of accountability and transparency to have it in our community, because the employees are also more likely to be members of our community versus bringing a child up to North Oklahoma City. So, Councilmember Hall.
Well, I was just going to jump in and say that I've also heard a lot about the Juvenile Intervention Center by people who have been involved in it in the past, in the brief time that I've been on council. And I do think it's notable that for the size of this committee, I mean, there were over 40 people on this committee, and with a lot of different social service agencies, and that this made it to the top of something to reconsider, I think is also important to take into consideration.
I agree. So I'm sure that this is one that we're going to be discussing at our retreat next week, because even council members not here today have expressed to me their interest in discussing that more. So hopefully this is one we can coalesce around and a plan forward for and start that process. Councilmember Patron, did you have anything to add on this one before we continued on? I'm trying to make sure we leave enough time to get to our second agenda item.
Not really. I would just say that it's also something that we could consider partnering with the school on as far as expenses are concerned.
Oh, yes. I think that's a great idea. Make a note on that. Okay. So the next item on this list was identify resources to expand telemedicine services and other mobile resources. I assume that means other mobile medical resources. And yeah, this is one that I think we should continue to discuss with Norman Regional. We're so lucky to have a public trust health system in our community. And my hope is that we can continue to expand their services. I know that they will do referrals and telemedicine screenings for COVID testing. And so, they're already kind of starting to dip their toe into that water of broader community support. And my hope is that we can continue doing this with them, and also in conjunction with Variety Care for some of our lower income and homeless residents as well. Councilmember Hall.
Yeah, I was just going to say that one of the positive unintended consequences of a pandemic is, I think, that all of our health providers in the metro area have definitely brought their A game to improving telemedicine and access to that. So I think, that's something that they've definitely expanded and gotten much better at, and can only bode well for the future.
I agree. And I just had this thought that I think this item could also start to kind of coalesce around that physical hub for social service agency collaboration. If we're at all interested, if the council as a whole decides that kind of this community center idea is a way to move forward with multiple of these items, this one could also be folded into that, making sure that we build in the infrastructure and the room space to be able to provide like community vaccine clinics, as an example, to pull some of that off the plate of the health department, or allow them an opportunity to come in and, provide some of these opportunities outside of the health department site itself. So, I think that there's a lot of ways that this could also interplay with maybe possibly the senior center, as Councilmember Hall brought up when we were talking about Norman Forward. So, I think there are a lot of opportunities to expand telehealth and telemedicine, especially if we keep that in mind as we're building any infrastructure that goes along with this.
I think that the hospital is going to be partnering with some kind of programming with the well also. And so that might be another location.
Yes, I think that's a great idea. And I will keep that in mind, because I actually have a meeting with Norman Regional CEO Richie Splitt on Monday. So I'm going to talk to him about some of this stuff. So I will be sure to drop it on his plate for him to consider another time. Councilmember Patron, anything on this one? I'm going to take that as a no.
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. And so number 9.
Could you hear me okay?
Yes, I could. Thank you. I think we'll skip over number 9, expand the hours of current mobile crisis service units, because we've already talked about that. So we'll move on to number 10, expand community outreach through involvement and or expansion of programs such as the Neighborhood Alliance of Central Oklahoma. And how are we supposed to pronounce this one? Mosaicos? It's a really long acronym. I don't think I'm supposed to just say all the letters. I might as well just say the whole thing. I do really like this one. As I mentioned when we were on the study session meeting about this, I think it could also have an impact outside of just the policing world. I think there are a lot of reasons to better knit our neighborhood ties together, kind of as individual historic districts or HOAs, or where there were formerly HOAs, or even just pockets of similar streets, maybe that are not in a historic district and don't have an HOA, for support during a pandemic, as an example. For rural Norman, where they have defunct HOAs, where they have rural roads that they are required to maintain themselves, but they don't have an HOA to help manage that. And when you're on 40 plus acres, you might not know your neighbor all that well. So finding ways and resources and organizations to help us kind of build, I like to call it the pod system, these neighborhood pods. I think whether it's an HOA or a historic district or just an area of town, I think could be really helpful in a lot of ways, but also in the policing realm as well.
Yeah, I really am enthusiastic about developing any of the resources that we can use from the Neighborhood Alliance, because we've had really a lot of success in Ward 4 informally trying to form neighborhood groups, and the increased amount of community engagement that you get when you have a neighborhood organized and able to contact one another and look out for one another. It's a great public safety tool. We've had good success with our Neighbors Night Out program that the police department sponsors, and there's just so many unintended benefits, I think, from this one that definitely will expand community outreach in this particular area that we're trying to work on. But there's, I think, so many other benefits that we can achieve from getting neighborhoods organized in a more structural way. So I'm really hoping that we can move forward with this.
I completely agree. I see a lot of the early building of this almost maybe around like holidays, just to kind of get people used to interacting with each other in a way that they don't normally interact. One of the things we do in our neighborhood that I really love is a cookie exchange, where you bring, however many people RSVP, let's say it's 15, you bring 15 plates of a dozen cookies, and then you all exchange them. So you get all kinds of different cookies, and people get to talk about why they love this cookie and the family importance. And it's just a really great way to get to know neighbors in a way that isn't political. It isn't political at the local level. It's also not political at the neighborhood level, because it's not an HOA meeting where people are complaining about this or that. And I just think that if we could kind of start it in a very positive, neighborly, holiday type way, it can really build into something great. Our neighborhood, we have packages that are dropped off on the wrong porch, and so it gets posted in the neighborhood page and it gets delivered to the right place. People will leave plant cuttings out and just post on the neighborhood page, and boom, 2 hours later, all the plant cuttings are gone and everyone's got much more beautiful yard than they did previously. So I see a lot of ways that we can build this that doesn't feel burdensome or overly important, that we're not creating an overt importance to it. Just building neighborhoods and building binds between neighbors is a positive thing, no matter how far or how short it goes. So I really love this one.
Yeah, I do too. And that's literally how we have re-energized long-standing neighborhood associations within historic districts and other neighborhoods in Ward 4 by starting out with just having fun together and, sharing a season or a holiday, or just like the things that you mentioned, being able to look out for each other, pick up packages, that type of thing. And just, creating an environment where everyone feels comfortable contacting one another and basically looking out for one another and building community. So those are all really positive things that can come out of something like this.
Anything that can remind us that we are, in fact, neighbors, no matter how much or how little we disagree. This is going to be my final loaded comment on that one. Councilmember Patron.
I just want to share my support for this as well. I mean, this is really the backbone of all of it, I think, is getting back to seeing one another as the humans that we all are. And I just am really embracing the community aspect. So I really think that I'm glad that they added this to the list as a constant reminder for all of us.
Yep. I feel like this is one that they easily could have left off, and I'm glad they didn't. So I really like this. And I think that we're going to find some consensus on this at the retreat or whenever we talk about it next, and we'll be able to push forward pretty quickly. So that is everything on the task force. So just my final thought on this is that, I feel like we have had a lot of information thrown at us in a variety of different ways, and we have sought input from the public in a variety of different ways. And so my hope is that at our council retreat next week, we can talk about some of these and hopefully, in my opinion, answer that overarching question first and decide as a council, what are we trying to accomplish? And I have no doubt that the money that we have set aside currently is not going to be enough for whatever goal we come up with for this program. It's going to take maybe some trial and error, a pilot program, looking at things in a number of different ways, and probably sourcing funds from a variety of different places. But I think if we can answer that overarching question of what is our intended outcome, and not just the hard outcome, the one that can be explained in numbers, but also the soft outcomes of how can we change how marginalized populations in our community feel about the city, feel about the police department, and how can we improve that? And I'm sure that there are going to be things that come up at the retreat and probably afterwards that weren't included in the task force. One that had come up in our previous oversight meetings that I've still been trying to figure out a way to flesh out, and I will be bringing up at the retreat, is a complaint system that isn't exclusive to within the police department. For all the reasons that we talked about a couple months ago, is that if you're complaining to the police department about the police department, that's discouraging for a lot of people to even start that process. We only know about the complaints that come in. And so I'd love to think about different ways to structure that complaint process. City Attorney Catherine Walker had talked about this with us in previous meetings about ways that we can do this in ways that also abides by the terms of our FOP contract and just our general personnel, requirements and the firewall that needs to be there for a variety of reasons. So, but that's one that I would still like to continue fleshing out. And I'm sure that as we continue to have these public discussions, more feedback will come our way. And I still do feel that we need to find ways to intentionally reach out to marginalized communities, and not just in the typical way that we do by throwing together a survey form and posting it on the city's website. So I know we'll talk about a lot of that next week, as well as the second topic on our agenda that we will turn to now, which I just lost my agenda. Darn it. There we go. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Maybe I'm not. Can't figure out how to unshare. Oh, up at the top. Stop share. The big red button that would have bit me on the nose if I had not seen it. All right, item number 2, discussion regarding potential additional topics for the Charter Review Commission to consider. We are going to be hearing a semi-final presentation of the Charter Review Commission next week.
They're scheduled to have a public hearing on Monday during
Monday, okay.
Meeting time. And then they're going to come back and meet and develop their final report, assuming they don't get any other tasks added to their list after that.
Okay, well, this should serve as at least an initial heads up. And of course, I have had multiple conversations with Charter Review Commission Chair Bob Thompson about this, so he is aware. But because we have our retreat coming up next week, and because we have several new council members, at least, and maybe we'll have even one more by the time next week rolls around. You never know. I wanted to talk about possible additional topics that we want the Charter Review Commission to consider. Catherine, you might not be in a place to talk about this yet, but I have heard rumors that there might be Charter Review Initiative petitions filed that might address some of the things that I also wanted to talk about. So if we broach one of those topics, feel free to talk about whatever you're able to talk about. Maybe that's nothing, but so
3 new petitions this morning, and I have not.
They were filed this morning.
They were emailed, not technically filed.
Okay.
I think they're just wanting to know if we see any issues with the ballot title before they filed.
Okay. So I'm sure that they're probably not ready for anything to be talked about publicly, which is fine. So, but if you hear anything that you can jump in on and comment on, please feel free. As everyone can imagine, one of the things that I got lots of questions about was whether or not the Charter Review Commission was going to be tackling the recall language in our charter. And even one of those questions from the chair of the Charter Review Commission himself, because he was getting lots of questions about whether or not the Charter Review Commission was going to be taking that on. I do think that this recent run through of that language has shown us that there are some things that we need to tackle administratively, not through the charter review process, but also some things that probably should be looked at by the Charter Review Commission for possible changes. Could be everything from changing the threshold of signatures, wink, wink, which I'm sure is something that's going to be coming up here soon. That is one that has been mentioned. That is something that we could have the Charter Review Commission take a look at. Sundays and holidays count towards the 30 days is something that was brought up multiple times by multiple people when I was trying to explain to them how the 30-day clock worked, because of course they're just thinking whatever the date was that it was filed in July to whatever the date, the 30-day date would be in August. Then I had to explain no Sundays, no holidays. And that frustrated a few people because the city clerk doesn't get Saturdays or Sundays or holidays off from having to do her signature review. So my thought was that at minimum that needs to be aligned. However direction we go, whether the 30 days should exclude Sundays and holidays, although I'm sure that if we had more in-person church, that there would be lots of signatures gathered on Sundays. So my preference would be more towards aligning the 30-day clock for the signature gathering to be in line with the 30-day clock for signature verifying, with the only exclusion being holidays. So that is one. Filing financial disclosures for organizations that are either working in support of or in opposition to recall petitions. If there's political money being spent in this city, I think everyone deserves to know more information about the groups involved. Limits on the number of officials that can be recalled at the same time is something that was brought up by multiple people. I think it's a very scary prospect for literally an entire single city council to be recalled at once. And there are windows of time throughout the year where that is possible. So that was something that had been brought up to me to be considered. Formalization of a minimum rationale for recalls. This is something that is not uncommon, even in other cities in Oklahoma that have recalls. They actually list in their city charters reasons why a recall can happen. Basically, minimum triggers, types of behaviors, pending charges, or misdemeanor charges that maybe wouldn't require just an immediate oust from the seat. And one, which I'm sure everyone is going to understand why, all signature pages must be turned in at the deadline, even if they don't meet the required number of signatures. That if you are collecting people's signatures, that everything should be turned in, because you have and especially starting November 1, Catherine, you might be able to talk about this, considering that a new state law goes into effect on November 1, requiring that birth dates be added to each signature line, to me, that also makes me think that all signature pages must be turned in, because that is even more incredibly important, vital information about someone that you're turning over to someone that they could do just whatever they want with if they don't reach the number of signatures.
Yeah, and that's a state law change, not for recall, but for initiative and referendum petitions. You know, and those petitions at the state level typically, and here at the municipal level too, that's just the count. It's not the verification process. But it looks to me like they're looking for ways for other, typically in those situations, outside groups look at the signatures and have a challenge based on some insufficient number or people who aren't really registered voters. And so they're looking for ways to be able to match up those identifiers. We learned going through this recently, there's a lot of people with the same name, similar names. Maybe they go by their middle
Went through that same
initial.
thing too.
A lot. And so that would be really helpful to be able to match those up in a verification process, whether it's by the clerk or by a challenger.
Yep. And I do completely agree with that, but I do also recognize that that is a piece of incredibly important information that basically once you add the birth date to those signature pages, you are giving someone almost all the information that they would need to steal your identity. And so it does concern me that if we are going to, and it concerns residents. I mean, I've had residents ask me why were, the signatures for my ward, not the person I was speaking to, that they were concerned that their ward signatures didn't have to be turned in, and would they be, because they were concerned about what people would do with those signatures and all of that information. So, and there are some things that we can work on administratively, like changing of our forms. And although that requirement was only for initiative and referendum, I don't see why we wouldn't align with state law for recalls too. There's minimum level of due process that I think it also eliminates a lot of gaps and holes in the difference between our charter and state law that I think would protect actually petition gatherers, that they would then know that we are at least aligning all the way across the board in a way that is defendable in court. That if they do everything the way state law requires for initiative and referendums, then they are securing themselves a better chance of succeeding if a challenge is brought forward. And also,
needs to be in the charter to be able to enforce that, I think. So
say what? I'm sorry, I missed that.
That type would need to be in the charter to be able to really protect both the petition gatherers and any challengers.
Okay, then I think that's definitely something to maybe include. And Catherine, maybe you can talk a little bit about the process, because I don't think we don't have any council members on here who weren't involved in the process of establishing this most recent charter, but there are probably going to be council members who watch this afterwards who weren't. So can you talk a little bit about the resolution that established the Charter Review Commission and how we would want to maybe craft language next week at the retreat to revise it?
PowerPoint, because I was hoping I'd have some of the new council members in this meeting. So just
well, I'm sorry, but if you do it anyway, I've been in running conversation with a couple of them about this topic, so I'm happy to point them to this part of the meeting so that they can rewatch it.
I'll share my screen. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so some of this is a little background that you all know already because you've already been through this process, but Oklahoma cities can be charter cities or statutory cities. Charter cities have the benefit of claiming home rule, which means we get to regulate matters of purely local concern, whereas if you're a statutory city, you're limited to what's in Title 11. You don't have that home rule argument, so that's an important part of our governing structure. The charter is our constitution. This sets forth the fundamental laws of the city. It can't be amended or changed in any way by council. It has to go to the voters for any change, whether that's removing language or adding language. So it's not the ideal location to place restrictions where you want flexibility, but it is a great place to put things where you really want to set forth something that's fundamentally important to the city not just now, but for years to come. We have a charter requirement that was adopted with our last charter review commission by the voters, that the charter gets reviewed at least once every 10 years. That charter review commission met in the mid, probably 2013 to 2015. And so the date in the charter says that begins in 2024, because that was 10 years from the time they reviewed that provision. But of course you can do it more often, which we're doing now. The current commission was appointed in the summer of 2019 to review specific items that were provided by City Council. They've had monthly meetings that were open to the public. We did have the pandemic, so for a while we didn't have meetings. The chair and the members of the commission really didn't feel like we got the same level of discussion, or that we would get the same level of discussion in a Zoom meeting that we have in person. These have been really great meetings. A lot of former council members, but a lot of people in the community with a broad perspective. And it has been a really good process with a lot of diverse viewpoints, but really good discussion. It's been one of the most productive committees I've been able to staff because of that. So they're moving pretty quickly despite, the things we've gone through this year in 2020. They're having a quarterly public hearing, which is required by the resolution, on Monday. And then they'll provide quarterly reports to City Council. Depending on what happens at the retreat and whether or not we amend the resolution and add additional things to their list to review, they're pretty ready to bring their final report to council, subject to my drafting, and the hearing on Monday. They've gotten through the list that was given to them, and so we'll be moving forward with that. These are the things that were on their list. It's a pretty robust list, but like I said, they've been really efficient in looking at all these, yet thorough. It's been a really good experience. Consider adding language to the charter related to the appointment and removal of a city auditor. That would be a full-time employee of the city of Norman, but appointed and subject to removal by council. Review the charter to consider whether the city attorney should be appointed and subject to removal by city council. Consider adding language to the charter that would establish consequences for the ethics ordinance, for any violations of the ethics ordinance. Review your monthly stipend to consider increasing it. Consider adding language requiring reimbursement for cell phone expenses as additional compensation received by council members. Review Article 2 to consider whether the term of office for council members should be changed from 2 to 3 years, and whether the term of office for the mayor should be changed from 3 to 4 years. Review Article 2 to consider whether the term of office for all elected officials should expire on the last Tuesday of the month in which a runoff election is held or scheduled to be held. Consider adding language to Article 2 of the charter that would require a sitting council member to resign their position when they file for another office. Consider adding language that would require a candidate to reside in the ward in which he or she seeks election for at least 6 months prior to the filing for that office. Every time we have a charter review commission, we have something about the water rate provision or the utility rate provision. This one was a little different. Consider adding language that would require council to consider a resolution calling for a vote of the electorate to increase utility rates under certain recommendations, like a finding of financial need by the finance director, or upon the recommendation of an independent elected utilities board. Consider adding language to the charter to establish a resident or community bill of rights. And then consider, this was a cleanup requested by the hospital authority, consider amending Article 6 to increase the number of members on their board from 9 to 11. Consider adding language requiring a vote of the electorate for approval of any TIF district over $5 million. Review of the vacancy process. And I think this is one of the initiative petitions we expect to see.
That's what I suspected.
Yeah, so it really, I don't want to get into what the Charter Review Commission recommended here because I won't remember all of them, but looking at the process we've been undertaking more recently, how do we ensure that we get someone appointed or elected into that office?
What I find so interesting before you continue is that this item on the vacancy only carves out exceptions unless the vacancy was created due to removal from office as a result of proceedings by a court. And I was like, they did not consider a death, which I thought was really interesting. So just a little point. Please continue.
Review Article 2 to consider whether to allow partisan elections for municipal office. So those are the things they kind of waded through over the last year. Like I said, it'll come to council on a final report. They want to get this next public hearing done first to see if they might change their mind on anything they're recommending. Then I'll draft a final report, and the commission has to approve it by 2/3 vote. If they don't all agree, you may very well see a minority report. That's happened before, and it's actually called out in the resolution. Council will then have to hold a special meeting and vote separately on each item, and the vote is whether to send what they've recommended to the voters. That doesn't mean you can't say, no, we're not sending that to the voters, but we're going to rewrite what you recommended because we kind of like it, but we want to tweak it or something like that. But you would be voting just on their recommendation alone at that meeting. I did want to point this out. Kate or Councilmember Bierman and I talked about this the other day, and it kind of hit me. Oh my gosh, October 27th is coming. After the budget amendments were adopted in June, one of those amendments, of course, was to fund the municipal auditor position. So council members asked that we go ahead and prepare that language and move that forward for council consideration, sort of outside of the Charter Review Commission process. So that came to you on first reading. It came to you on second reading in August and was postponed to October 27th. So you'll see that on your agenda this month. The election date that was in the ordinance and the resolution calling the election back in August was November 3rd. So that's obviously no longer possible. So we'll be needing to modify that date. So that's just something to kind of keep in your head about something coming up because that will require some amendments. And that was all I had on that.
So before I turn it over to Councilmember, I think Councilmember Patron has a question, but the only thing I wanted to comment on this before she continued is that in my conversations with the chair of this committee, Midway Bob Thompson, he has indicated that the commission is perfectly willing to consider additional topics. That just because they have finalized these, his assessment is that they are happy to consider additional topics and keep working. So I just wanted to make sure that I pointed that out. But Councilmember Patron, take it away.
It's just a somewhat related question. Can you tell me what is the rule in the charter about how many commissions or boards a resident can sit on at any specific time?
It's not in the charter. We do have a provision in, I believe, Chapter 4. I'd have to find it. It doesn't apply to all boards and commissions, but there is some restrictions depending on which board and commission it is, on whether or not you can sit on more than one at a time.
Can you speak to the hospital board specifically? Do you have that readily available?
The hospital board is called for in our charter, but it doesn't have that restriction, I don't believe. I can pull that up.
Okay. It's not one that has restrictions on how many you can serve on?
No.
Does the charter review?
No, the Charter Review Commission isn't set up by ordinance or in the charter. The actual commission isn't. So the hospital board does not have that limitation in the charter, and I don't believe it's in the trust indenture either.
Are hospital board members allowed to vote on or any other question that might be on the before the Charter Review Commission? Are they allowed to vote on items for boards for which they sit on?
So what we have told them, we do have a couple that you all appointed to the Charter Review Commission that do sit on the hospital board. And what we've told them, we've gone through our ethics policy just like we would with you all. Do you have a pecuniary interest, a direct threat of some employment effect or anything like that as a result of this action? No, both of them said. And then, so they disclosed that on the record, and then they voted as a potential conflict, not an actual conflict. Employment consequence, that's the term I was trying to think of, sorry.
So were they allowed, was that particular one where did they vote on those questions? And were there any other charter review questions for which individuals sat on different commissions or boards or jobs for which there could be a appearance of a conflict?
There weren't any other items to my knowledge that required any disclosure of a potential or actual conflict. The hospital was the only one. And so like I said, we went through that analysis and they disclosed as a potential conflict and participated per our ethics policy.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I only had, because I had completely forgotten that the selection committee was on the CRC's agenda already. So other than the recall, so the recall language, the reason I asked the question and had you give the presentation is because if council wanted the Charter Review Commission to take a look at our recall language and either straight align it with state law, at least in terms of the process outside of the signature threshold, which is obviously a local decision. But outside of that, or even including that, if they wanted to, we wouldn't have to go into detail of all of the different aspects of the recall language or all of the different items that were brought to my attention or the chair's attention. We could just simply address updates, concerns, questions with the recall or so language. So we could write it in a broad way that the Charter Review Commission could be free to decide for themselves what, if any, changes they would like to make, correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. I wanted to make sure that was the case. The only other item that I had, but this is something I wanted to bring to council members' attention, and so we can talk about it more at the retreat, is I would like to see, instead of the Charter Review Commission meeting only every 10 years, because as you can see, look what happens. I mean, this is going to be a meeting where we're going to have 12 to 15 recommendations that we're going to have to vote on individually and then decide how many elections we want to break this up into, because ballot fatigue is a real thing. And so my thought was that we needed to have a biannual Charter Review Commission that meets every other year, because and the state has become far more active with preemption and changing and making changes that affect us at the local level that might necessitate more frequent charter changes to clean up some of these things. And so I would love to see the Charter Review Commission meet every other year. It can either be a standing commission that has the same members, or we could pick new members every single time. But I think every other year, or, I would say worst case scenario, every 5 years, as opposed to every 10, just at the speed that things are moving and changing now as compared to 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. I just think it would be more helpful for our city to be more nimble with how we're able to address changes in state law. As an example, like the election date issue, which was something that we had to address because we had to address it right then. So if we have a biannual Charter Review Commission, I don't even know what the term is for an every 5-year commission. Maybe there isn't a term, but something more frequent than every 10 years. And then I do want to pitch this to our new council members, because I know Councilmember Foreman has been collecting a lot of feedback from her constituents about items for the retreat and things that her constituents would like her to address. And so I figured the retreat would be a good opportunity for us to talk about any additional items we might want the Charter Review Commission to discuss. And does anyone have any off the top of their heads that they wanted to drop mention of today?
I think that we should definitely limit, no matter what board and commission you're on, we want more people involved in the process, and there should be term limits. So one board and commission, I'd like for the Charter Review Commission to take a look at what they recommend for how many boards and commissions you can set on at one time, and whether or not term limits would be something that they would suggest. And then the third would be for that, if there is a question coming before your board or commission for which it may lead to an appearance of a conflict, that body itself votes as to whether or not they want that person to participate in that question. In other words, if they're concerned that it's polluting the integrity of that item before the committee, then they should have the opportunity to voice that amongst themselves.
And that would just be a change to our policy, which council adopted by resolution. So that maybe would be something that's pretty easy to fix without having to go to a vote of the people.
Okay, and I have some other
thought
stuff
that-
written at home.
Okay. Because I actually thought that was something that we were looking into anyway with our review of the whole structure of boards and commissions and getting that standardized with term limits and how many boards you can serve on. I mean, we started that conversation a long
We
time
did.
ago.
And we have a lot of boards
25
and
years ago, it feels like.
commissions, feels like that we're all set up different ways.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the challenge, and so we'll have to go back to whatever formed that committee, whether it was an ordinance or resolution, and modify and hopefully maybe get some uniformity.
Yeah, that was going to be the next step. Again, it feels like 100 years ago, where we had gotten in the process. We had kind of done a review of all the different boards and commissions, which ones have term limits, which ones don't, which ones have ward specific seats, which ones don't, which ones have technical expertise requirements, which ones don't, and then how they were all established. And so the next step that I was hoping to take was to get with Catherine and say, okay, from this point on, can we standardize the process for these committees and commissions in one way? Like, you know, some of our Norman Forward, you know, committees, as an example, are ad hoc committees. Some of them are established by ordinance. And if we could create one process that no matter how the project or the topic is handled, you know, by an ordinance, that the committee is still established by resolution, and in the same way that every other committee is established, and then try and line all the old ones up as best we can through some just technical changes. You know, it'll be a consent docket that's got 50 items that are basically just minor amendments to the ordinance or the resolution that created them. But that is something that I wanted to tackle. And the number of boards and commissions had come up during that discussion. And so, but we hadn't really gotten to a point where we wanted to draw a line in the sand, because of course, wherever we draw that line, there are going to be people on both sides of it. There are going to be boards or committee members on either side. The same with term limits. I don't know that there's a way that we can establish a reasonable term limit policy that isn't going to force at least someone off of a board or a commission. And we're just going to have to decide, is there a mechanism that we can implement that? Like, this goes into effect in 2022, as an example. So
on expiration of the current term.
Right. A way so that it's not, we pass this resolution and then 30 days later when it goes into effect, you've got 10 people who are now immediately booted from their boards. So figuring out a way to implement this in a way that isn't completely disruptive is kind of going to be the next step. But that was something that I had on my radar as I was trying to go back through my 2019 and 2020 topics to be like, where did we even leave some of this stuff? So I kind of revived the tree canopy master plan idea, and then the rescope of the boards and commissions was going to be next. So, you know, because I've got a lot of extra time.
I'm just definitely interested in continuing having that discussion. And I do think there's a way to do it as you just suggested about, you know, tying it to whatever their current limit is. And maybe some committees don't even have that, but I know quite a few do. So,
And there are some that don't have at all, like the Animal Welfare Oversight Committee doesn't have term limits at all because it was never intended to be a permanent committee. And now that it was an ad hoc committee basically. And so now that we, you know, I feel like we're past the point where we can just be like, nope, sorry, that was temporary. I think it serves such an important purpose now that we can't get rid of it, but we have to figure out how we're going to standardize it so we can standardize that one. There are no term limits. The only trigger for someone leaving their seat is if they miss the required number of missed meetings to get ousted, or they just decide to leave, which is what's been happening recently. Y seats have come up about once a year. But prior to that, it was a pretty stable committee that had board members on for a long time, which is all well and good, but it doesn't really provide opportunities for new people to get into city government. And I think boards and commissions are a really great way to plug into City Hall for the very first time. That was me. And so I think that would be something to tackle maybe in next month's meeting, is kind of revisit that, kind of go over the minutes again. I can get them from Brenda and send them out to everyone so that we can kind of get back into that topic. Councilmember Holman.
Just on that specific topic, I definitely wanted to leave some room to maneuver here. I didn't want to have, I don't think I wanted to have a city charter amendment that said there are term limits and this is what it is, can't be changed. Because I think there may not always be other people that want to serve on a particular board or committee. There may not always be people waiting is what I mean. And if certain people do have expertise and knowledge about some complicated subjects, I wouldn't want to run them off necessarily if they're still willing or able to serve. But I would like to see some more structure to it that kind of identifies maybe it's 2 terms but whatever X circumstances, you could be reappointed, stuff like that, just so that there's some ability to move there if needed. Ideally, we would have, a line of people ready for all the committees, and I know some of them do have people that have been waiting a while to try to get on them, but I think some of them probably don't have that at all. So I would be kind of hesitant about a policy that was in the city charter that was kind of a one size fits all thing. But I definitely think there's got to be a more established, process or outline structure of the committees and what people can expect when they sign up to serve on them too. Like, I'm signing up for, 1 or 2 terms. There could be a third option, something like that. But I do want to be able to get more people in those spots that are interested, that are willing, that want to contribute in that way. We should definitely be doing everything we can to provide as many opportunities as possible. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. Definitely. And I think a lot of that can be done by the council just through our own policy without a charter amendment regarding it. But we really do need to clean that up and get some sort of structure in place that's cohesive across the board, I think, for all of them.
I agree.
And I like having ward. Sorry, one more thing. I like having ward designees for as many committees as possible. It can just kind of keep in. It can be a little difficult because you can't always, like in my ward, it can sometimes be difficult for me to find somebody I don't know that I could find 35 people to serve on every single committee if they were all ward specific. It might be very hard for me to find that many people in Ward 7 willing to do that. Maybe not if I really went out and searched, but so I wouldn't want there to be an instance where, a certain ward just didn't have much interest and we couldn't get somebody, so there's empty seats or something. But I do like, in general, the idea of having spots for each ward, and then, council members can reach out to their constituents and say, hey, are you interested? Or I need somebody to serve on this committee. Is this something you'd be interested in as representing the Ward 7, Ward 7 on the bike committee or whatever it may be. So that's kind of what I think about those things. Thanks.
Catherine, I was going to ask go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, for the committees that are charter created, would we have to go through a charter amendment process to make adjustments to those?
Most of ours are not charter created. It's just the Regional Hospital Authority, I think maybe Planning Commission. I know it's mentioned in the charter, but I'm not sure if that's, it may also be in Chapter 4, but Chapter 4 of our code is where we have all of our permanent boards and commissions, or should have, I think, in my opinion. Not all of them are in there, but that would be the perfect place to codify this kind of approach with term limits and all of that. And you can include in the introductory portions, if if you're unable to find someone for a ward-specific ward, then nominations could be taken from other wards or something like that. I mean, I think all those things
Sure.
can be addressed, and that gives you one place to go and look. Ad hoc committees don't make sense probably to be codified if they're truly ad hoc temporary committees, but these permanent committees certainly should be codified, and it would make it much easier, I think, to have them all in one place.
I agree. And, I think especially for when it comes to technical expertise, I think there needs to be an exemption for that.
Mm-hmm.
But I gotta maintain a little bit of optimism that, necessity is the mother of invention, and that if we force council to dive into their ward and find people, there will be people who step up. But I think they need to be asked. And that's one reason why I've never been such a big fan of having kind of like the waiting list for boards and commissions, because what that does is penalize new people to city government. Because if you're new to city government and you want to participate and you want to join a board or commission, if you have the misfortune of applying for a board or commission that has a really long waiting list, then you might get stuck at the back of the line and never hear anything. I would love to kind of think about how we can best generate interest in city government, not just among the people who have already been participating, but new people. And so it's kind of like, like when I hire for Cool Beans, I have all of the applications that had already come in previously, but I still post the job and I still generate all the new applicants. And then I look at all of them and call through the old ones, make sure they're still interested. But then I give everyone is on the same playing field for the job opening that we have, whether you submitted an application a year ago or whether you submitted an application yesterday. And I think that would be really important for us to do here. Maybe it doesn't need to be charter directed, except for the few that we have, but all the rest of them can be in Chapter 4. Councilmember Patron, I want to give you a chance because I know I'm gonna get the
Yeah, I
cane
would just
get yanked
add to
off
that
stage soon.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that especially on the ward specific ones, just the ability for how do they get onto those boards and commissions, as far as the council member of that ward, some opportunity to be involved in that process. Just a thought. I don't know. This is a longer discussion, but I do think, I hope that it is on our agenda for
I'm putting it on next month's oversight. So
yeah, but
we'll
for
go back to
the retreat on the things that we want to add to for the charter review, because another one, a resident has brought up a really good point about new council members that ran unopposed. In other words, a non-incumbent that runs unopposed. While we were super fortunate to have Matt Peacock come in, a lot of people were saying, okay, well, what if it wasn't him? What if it was somebody that was, would never be elected in a million years by anybody? And that's the only person that applies. So you have zero vetting. Like, what if it's a,
Oh, I see. Oh, now I get what you're saying. They reached out to me as well about
like what if it's somebody
having
who's awaiting trial for murder?
Yeah, additional oversight and
like,
vetting of unopposed candidates for city council positions. Could there be
I think
an
that
additional
was a
process?
really good point.
So yeah, that's something we can bring up at the retreat to talk about as a possible addition to the Charter Review Commission. And so it just hit 6 o'clock, and I know that I'm going to get the cane to yank me off stage for Planning Commission coming up. So does anyone have any final comments about any of either of the agenda items tonight?
Nope, it's been a great meeting.
No. All right then. Well, thank you all. I'm going to try and write this up in a little update to send to the rest of council. I failed in my 2020 campaign pledge, not campaign pledge, but my 2020 pledge to myself, my New Year's resolution to send out monthly updates of what happened in my committee, because I know that not everyone gets a chance to attend these committee meetings and not everyone gets a chance to go back and watch. So I am going to write up a summary of this and send it out to all the council members, because my hope is that we will be talking about the Charter Review Commission at next week's retreat. And I'll include the link so that our new council members can watch the presentation on the Charter Review Commission so they can get up to speed on how it was developed and what it is doing. Councilmember Hall.
Yeah, I just have one more quick question about the public hearing because there are so many that that are being considered, and I'm just wondering, how are we conducting that public hearing? Is it just the same? Can people still show up at City Hall to comment?
Yes,
Via
we're
you?
going, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We're going to run it like we do a council meeting. So the commission members prefer to Zoom in. We'll have the study session room set up for comments. People can come to the chambers and see the discussion or see the presentation on the big screen. I don't know, Bob and I haven't flipped a coin to see if he's going to make me do that yet or not, but usually one of us will do it. And then take questions. I believe we are also going to have an opportunity for people to email those comments in, but I'll check with Annalise about that. Brenda's out this week. Annalise and I were talking about it just yesterday, so I'll
Great.
follow up with her.
I'm glad we're thinking about it to try to get as robust a conversation as we can.
I agree. And Catherine, if there is any like a graphic or something that Annalise can put together pretty quickly here in the next day or so, not just a press release, but just a graphic from the city of Norman that talks about the Charter Review Commission that can be posted on the city's social media pages tomorrow that we can all share. Even if it just links to a list of topics on the city website or something, I think it would bog down a post about it and would bog down a graphic. But even just an announcement that we're having this public hearing, something that we can share before the weekend, because I think that's really important. When we only share things on the weekend, I think it kind of gets lost. So I'd really love to be able to share it like tomorrow evening and then again over the weekend. So yeah, if she's able to throw something like that together, I think that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think there is a heightened interest in the work of the Charter Review Commission right now. So I think anything we can do to make sure people understand that this is their opportunity to weigh in on Monday would be really, really good.
I agree. And then at some point, we're all going to have a discussion about how we're going to break these up and put them on ballots, because that's going to be a lot. So, all right, I'm going to go. I don't have Brenda here scowling at me, but I can feel her over my shoulder. I'm like, oh no. So, and this will give Bryce time to get this reset up for Planning Commission. So, if anyone has any questions or comments about this, please feel free to email me. I will also be posting this update on my Facebook page and sharing it to at least the Ward 1 page, and then everyone can grab it from there or from my council member page and share it to their ward pages. So I appreciate you all. And next month, we'll be doing an update on the tree canopy master plan and rescoping of boards and commissions. We'll bring that back to the forefront and get moving on that as well. So appreciate y'all. Have a good rest of your day.
Be done.
Bye.